Influence, the global podcast that shines a spotlight on the influencer marketing industry.
Welcome to Influence, the global podcast that shines a spotlight on the influencer marketing industry. I'm Gordon Glenister, and in this edition we'll be sharing some of the findings from our exclusive influencer research. I'll also be talking to Jack Morel-Paulo from BCMA member influencer platform Onalytica and hear his take on the industry. So earlier this year, the BCMA and one of our members, Whalar, conducted a piece of research through their platform to understand what some of the key challenges influencers face today and what changes they'd like to see in the industry. We also wanted to establish who they most admire and why. So here are some of the responses. The biggest frustrations held by content creators were not being paid on time, feeling undervalued by brands, and the increasing reliance on algorithms, particularly by platforms such as Instagram. Other areas that caused frustration were a lack of diversity in influencers in brand collaborations, being able to obtain ownership of content with photographers when they're brought in by the brands, inconsistencies of brand guidelines offered to influencers, and being able to adapt quickly in this volatile field of marketing. It was also clear from the responses that the impact of mental health issues were prevalent, particularly due to the stresses and strains of the role. The top three areas that influencers and content creators need support with are marketing advice, legal guidance, and financial planning. Other areas that also came up included help with merchandising and licensing, and most importantly, finding brands that resonate with their profile and passion. Lastly, we asked our respondents who they most admire, and among those that came up were All That Is She, Me and Ola, and of course Teza. When I looked at some of the responses, it was quite interesting to see what came up. There are many reasons influencers look up to others. Among them were being super creative, their consistency in the style of posting, certainly being relatable and authentic, and having a strong engagement with their followers. So if you'd like to see a copy of the full report, you can certainly download it on the BCMA website, which is www.thebcma.info.
Influence, the global podcast that shines a spotlight on the influencer marketing industry.
So influencer marketing is not always about B2B marketing as some may think. Increasingly, those involved in the business-to-business sector are looking more closely at influencer marketing as an engaging media to build business. With that in mind, my guest today is Jack Morel-Paulo, who is head of influencer marketing at influencer platform Onalytica. Welcome, Jack.
Thanks, Gordon.
So before we get going into the interview, tell us a little bit more about Onalytica.
So Onalytica is a software and consultancy service. We're based in Southwark in London with another office in New York with a few people based out there. We're really focused on helping brands. It's not exclusively B2B, but I'd say it's a lot. Really, I think build kind of more inspiring content and campaigns and sort of leverage their topical influencer community to really, build relationships with key opinion leaders in their space and increasingly to sort of do that programmatically. So own those relationships as an organization and leverage those to actually, whether it's make one of their events perform better online or come up with a really interesting piece of kind of long form content that they can then leverage to drive signups. People come to us with lots of different challenges within their marketing organization, but I think the uniting factor is they're really looking to this new group of kind of online thought leaders or influencers or whatever you want to call them to really drive better content performance and content and event performance.
That's great. So what sort of campaigns have you done at Onalytica that have worked really, really well?
I think a good example that I probably always use, any client I've ever spoken to will attest to this, that I always wheel this example out, but I think it's a good one. So this is now a little over a year old, but we're working with VMware. It's a kind of software company, a lot of cloud type solutions. So probably like a pretty typical example of one of our clients in the tech sector, and they were looking to drive signups through this kind of piece of gated content. So what they did is they worked with some sort of bloggers that they used our platform to find. So the platform kind of helps you find people who've got a high degree of topical authority on the key topics that you're working on, and it's very keyword specific. So we always make sure we build that out. You find the people who are talking about the right things that your audience care about, not just cloud, but cloud solutions in financial services, or how cloud and blockchain work together, something like that. So we help them find these bloggers, and what they were really keen to do is obviously drive this kind of new research report that they had coming out and make it perform really well. So they worked with these bloggers to write, for each of them to basically write up their own thoughts on the content, having been given early access. They then actually hosted those write-ups on those bloggers' own sites. So it was kind of externally hosted to give that sort of external third-party validation to the content with the sign-up form for the VMware piece of content at the bottom of the page. And they actually put some paid spend behind that. So because it's a third-party ad, essentially it's not, that ad isn't coming directly from the brand. That performs better than your own sort of branded content. So you see a higher click-through, even if the kind of number of signups on the page stays the same, you still see that improved performance. And I think that's a really good example of how both at the sort of technical campaign level, putting the paid spend behind a third party source, and at the content level where you're sort of leveraging experts who really know what they're talking about and who already have an engaged audience on your key topics, you're kind of able to use influencers, I think, in a really smart way. So yeah, I think that's one of my favorite examples, and it's something I'd encourage everyone to do tomorrow if you can.
But it's a very good example, actually. I'm assuming, though, what makes it even more authentic is it's using the same message, but in a different tone of voice that is relevant to that audience. And one of the things that certainly I've picked up on is relevance and authenticity is essential in any campaign. Would you concur?
Yeah, and I think we're always looking to make sure we have that with an influencer. I think the thing, what maybe distinguishes our approach to influencer identification is that we're looking very carefully at specific topical authority. So, you think of the metrics someone might use to measure authority. Obviously, reach is a classic. It's really a measure of popularity. It tells you something, but actually someone with 3,000 followers could be far more knowledgeable than someone with 30,000 followers. That's nothing. Obviously, you can also look at the number of times someone has posted on a topic, but you or I could post the words artificial intelligence 9 times a day between now and the end of the earth. It wouldn't actually make us an expert. So again, you've got to look at, how is that audience reacting? And that's why we really look at that, really are looking to determine that expertise and that audience engagement by looking at inbound engagement when someone talks about that particular topic. I think that's what really consistently delivers, I think, very quality influencers and a kind of high number of people, even on sometimes fairly obscure topics. I think you're really able to understand who's influential within each topical community. We've had things from, pretty run-of-the-mill stuff, cloud solutions, artificial intelligence, blockchain, a lot of sort of classic thought leadership topics that tech businesses are looking at, all the way through to something like fish farming, where we're trying to understand, who's influential globally on ocean ecology. And every time, obviously I would say this, but I'm genuinely pretty impressed most of the time by what the platform is able to kind of bring back using that methodology.
Wow, that's impressive. So what about more traditional blue chips, and maybe let's just say a bank, a typical bank, for example, because, we know that influencer marketing is one of the fastest growing advertising medium, but it's still, there's also a lot of organizations out there that are teetering on the edge. They know that they should be doing this, but they're just not sure, or they're worried, they're very brand protective. So let's just take, for example, a bank, traditional bank. What sort of approach would an organization like you take to help and support, a big institution, considering influencer marketing?
I think there's obviously a couple of things to bear in mind. There's obviously the initial talking to, I'm going to deliver someone here is, I used to work in user-generated content before this, and the big lesson I learned from that is other people are already talking about your brand. It's too late. They're doing it online. It's happening. So that sort of surrendering of control has really happened in, we have audience first media now. That's a big part of how brands have to communicate. And I think you just have to move closer to where that audience is. I think the other thing is it's not really as much of a surrendering of control as people particularly imagine. What you're generally talking about is just, having key opinion leaders in your space talk about that space, give their opinions. If you think of what most branded content looks like, it's increasingly thought leadership based. It's an industry rather than a product centered approach. You're kind of getting people to talk about industry challenges, and make your blog or, whatever it is, your content a place where people come for industry solutions. And I think you just have to look at who is trusted on those questions. It is these external figures. And actually every organization, no matter how big an institution they are, understands this. You already are managing groups of external opinion formers. You've got a government affairs team. You've got a PR team. You've got an analyst relations team. You are acknowledging that some of these people are key opinion formers. You're just going to a new source that is less well established, but I think is able to drive, very, very good results. And something I cite a lot is Edelman's Trust Barometer. They survey a lot of people across 26 markets and they ask who's trusted. The figures who are most trusted are company technical experts, academic experts, and the kind of nebulous figure of people like me. Journalists and analysts are a decent way further down. And
that's interesting.
You probably know what people feel about government officials as well. That's another group that scores way further down. So I think I'm not saying burn down your PR department, kick the AR guys to the curb. I'm saying just a shift in emphasis in where we're sort of investing resources in a reasonable way to try and just get these key opinion formers. And you're not paying them to say nice things about your brand. That never works. There's no point, ask the PR team what happens when you try and exert too much control over a journalist. It never ends well. You ruin the relationship. But asking someone to talk about industry challenges that you have, that your products, your services offer a solution to, that's the kind of content everyone's trying to make, everyone's trying to talk about now. And you're just tapping a new group to really create that kind of content.
What's really quite interesting about what you just said there, this is quite different from the B2C environment, which is much more product-led, isn't it? And indeed paid for in many instances. So do you find that some of these specialists are paid for some of their content that they're providing? And how does that compare with the sort of B2C environment?
I mean, when it comes to paying influencers, I guess the way I think about it is if you're asking for a lot of someone's time or what they're doing has very high value to you, then I think it's reasonable to pay. The way I would encourage most brands to think about whether or not you're going to pay is basically figure out in advance before you start reaching out to influencers what you will and won't pay for. So I'll give an example. I don't think you should ever really be paying people just to post about your brand, because that's not influencer marketing or influencer relations. That's what Scott Guthrie, who's a big, one of the, I think, key thought leaders in this space, he really calls that influencer advertising. And I think he's bang on. Really, you're renting someone's platform, and that's an ad buy.
Absolutely.
And in some circumstances, that's fine, but that's not the same. So I think figure out what the value is of an interaction. What is this influencer going to bring? Some top premium influencers in, the AI or the fintech space, they can bring, these are people who can bring 5,000 engagements to one of your posts, hundreds of clicks from the right people. And that's obviously valuable to you. You'd pay for that in ad spend. You'd pay to get one of your execs interviewed in the FT for that. So
it's just another form of advertising, isn't it? Yeah, but very focused and targeted. I think that's what makes it particularly interesting. I was very lucky to be part of your workshop recently, which I thought was quite interesting because it was very vertical focused. So sometimes a lot of the education events that I see in the industry are all different industries, but this was quite focused around the financial sector. Why did you do that, and what sort of outcome did you have from that?
I think what we're seeing is the financial services sector is definitely growing as a sector for us. We're sort of traditionally, tech's probably the largest single group of clients, but we're increasingly seeing what you might call regulated industries, energy, healthcare, and financial services really growing quite fast because they're sort of recognizing that there's a similar use case. They've got a technical set of solutions that they're trying to market, and it's often to very specific groups. They've got these kind of niche target audiences that they're trying to get to. So with the tech sector, it's often you're trying to get at CIOs in large corporations to sort of encourage them to make you their digital transformation partner, for example. And I think the financial services sector is kind of like that as well. It's a specific set of things that you're really trying to sort of grow on. You know, it might be asset management or kind of wealth management and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think those niche audiences are really ripe for kind of being accessed through those key opinion leaders if you can find them. So give an example of something we worked on with an agency who are a partner of ours for a major asset manager. They were looking for basically to understand how to access high net worth individuals for their kind of wealth management services. And they had this big report out. So a bit like the VMware case, they've got a big report coming out on passing your wealth on to the next generation. They're sort of thinking, well, none of these high net worth individuals are necessarily online. So you've got to sort of reverse engineer and try and think, who are the people who make these decisions? And actually it's this group of, it's wealth managers, the accountants, the lawyers who specialize in this. They went out, used our platform to sort of discover all the right people who are talking about those themes and who had those sort of job titles. And they basically found this guy who runs the #1 wealth management podcast in the UK. They got their head of division onto that podcast to be interviewed so he could talk about, what that brand had to say. And that report ended up performing, I think, 3-4 times better than before. And you're not talking about very high numbers of downloads here. You're talking 1,500 downloads is a lot of downloads. But, they'd figured out exactly who the right person who was right in the middle of that network that everyone would know to kind of seed the content to co-create something really exciting. I think that's the key.
Yeah.
People often sort of feel like, when you're trying to buy an influencer and get them to post about you, don't get them to post about you. Co-create something you're both really proud of.
Absolutely.
That everyone wants to share. Create a cool video, something interactive, like an interesting new bit of research on your industry. Because I think otherwise you end up sort of begging someone like, oh, remember to use the company hashtag and all of these things, because you're thinking more about the process of it than actually the excitement and creating something really cool.
Some people just don't trust influencers. What would you say to people that are just not sure about this?
I think, as with any tactic, with any sort of marketing tactic, there's challenges. I guess the way I think about it is influencer is probably a very broad term that's covering 2, maybe 3 different types of activity. The kind of thing I'm encouraging people to do is essentially using the modern technology available to grow your network, the network of content creators and experts that you know. So I think because it happens online, people sort of tend to think of it almost as existing in a sort of different sphere. It's like a different
world.
Yeah, it's a different reality. It's kind of it's kind of funny, even though we all know that this stuff is so integrated. So really, just if you met someone at a networking event who was a copywriter, a freelance copywriter who had a great blog, you might ask them to come and guest blog for you. And I think that's the key, is that really, what we do should be a platform to building relationships with all the key people in your community, understanding what those people are interested in, what they care about, and then syncing up with them when there's a genuine opportunity for collaboration. That's why I'll always kind of steer people away from these one-off payment based. And I almost don't like to think about B2C versus B2B. I tend to think about industry approach versus a product focused approach. Because I think the product focused approach is kind of everything that's wrong with lots of types of marketing. It's talking about yourself. No one likes that guy at the party. The person who's only like, here are our products, here are our services, me. It's, this kind of one-off. You're only talking to people when you're only talking to your target audience when you need something from them.
Yeah.
The industry approach is you're actually trying to help them earlier in the buying funnel when they're trying to scope the challenge they have, understand the landscape better. And then, by syncing up with those key opinion leaders, with the right people, you're really helping them make decisions, educate themselves, and, basically help them find really great educational content. And I think that's where influencers are really at their best. And that's why I never encourage someone to just jump in and start. Don't start sort of waving wads of $5,000 around at people. But I don't think the B2C thing is, I've had people sort of call me on this before when I've said B2B versus B2C, and I think they're right. It's not a fair distinction to draw, because there's lots of really great examples in the B2C sphere where people are taking that industry approach. They're really thinking about what they want their influencer program or their overall social to achieve for them. So 2 examples actually from the beauty industry, which is very traditionally associated with that one-off product-based approach. But the first one is Sephora. So earlier this year, they announced that they're going to sort of stop doing these one-off approaches, and they were going to work with a dedicated group of, I think, 10 influencers, and they held auditions. So they asked everyone to submit a testimonial from one of their followers saying how that influencer had helped them, or how they'd influenced them, change their mind. Then they picked their 10, and now they work with them on an ongoing basis. They have them come to the factory and see how the products are made, come to product meetings and explore the whole thing. And you're really partnering on the whole thing. You're working with someone to help educate customers who want this kind of content.
Well, it's almost like an immersion then, isn't it? They're really involved, and one of the things I really like is this move towards almost like a brand ambassador approach, which isn't new. It's been around for a while, but I guess what you're saying is really get involved and have the brand and the influencer co-creating content together. I think is really, really important. So one last question, if I may, Jack, is really just talking about the platforms. I read recently there's nearly 750 of them around the world.
About half of those in the last year.
Yeah, exactly. So are there going to be more? And how does a brand decide which platform to choose from with so much choice?
I mean, I think obviously, I'm always going to come at this from the perspective of what I sort of, what I think is the right approach. But I guess I would say, is this someone who can help you really build a sustainable influencer approach? Something genuinely programmatic that you can do on an ongoing basis and is going to sort of help you skill up? Because I think anyone can point you at an influencer and say, this guy will do it for 10 grand. It's, are you actually going to really scale your influence and build enough relationships with the key people? And I guess the other thing is, a note of caution. We were talking about this earlier. Some of these social platforms are on the lookout now for people who are kind of getting their data in suspect ways. And I guess what I would say is, we've been around 10 years now. We've been doing this a long time. There's a lot of platforms with, a little bit of venture capital to play with. They're going to see, can we scrape some data? Can we kind of get a semblance of a business model going and win some customers? And I guess I would just really question where people are getting the data that they're using, because Facebook in particular is really on the lookout now, and platforms that are Facebook or Instagram based, I think, are going to have a bit of a reckoning in the next 6 months to a year as Facebook really tightens that up.
Influence, the global podcast that shines a spotlight on the influencer marketing industry.
We're delighted to announce our BCMA event focused on cybersecurity and how to protect yourself and your business from data breaches, IP theft, and hacking. I was recently heard of a mummy blogger who'd been targeted by fraudsters demanding Bitcoin, otherwise her Instagram account would have been removed. There have been more and more instances where influencers are being targeted in this area, so this event, complete with ethical hacker on the panel, will certainly give some comfort on what you need to do to protect yourself or your business. So it's on the 8th of November at the ADS Centre in London, and full details can be found on the BCMA website. So that's it for this edition of Influence. I hope you've enjoyed it, and as ever, we would welcome your feedback. Don't forget to keep an eye on the BCMA website for all the latest influencer marketing news. And until next time, from me, Gordon Glenister, thanks for listening and goodbye.